with Orlee Dykan Smith. She's product manager in vehicle experience for Waymo. In her previous position, she was at Uber, where she was product manager lead rider experience for autonomous vehicles. I've run two different tech companies where Orlee was on the team. This is earlier in her career, and in both cases, she led product development. I have never worked with a more talented individual at conducting customer discovery and developing customer experience, and that's why I've asked her to join me for this interview. Hello, Orlee. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Camille. I'm really excited to be here.
Why don't we start off with you sharing a little bit about your role at Waymo?
Sure. So today at Waymo, I, as Camille mentioned, I'm the product manager for the in-vehicle experience. So that means that I oversee the product and the experiences within and outside of the vehicle in our rideshare business.
So Orlee, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're working on right now. I'm sure it's proprietary, but maybe you can give us a general idea.
Sure. It is proprietary, but what I can do is paint a picture of some of the self-driving rideshare problem spaces. I'm sure that you've taken an Uber and a Lyft many times in your life, and the driver plays a really important role. And when you think about the role that they play, let's talk about one use case. So let's say that you're in an Uber or you're in a Lyft and you're commuting on your way to work, and I'm sure you've taken that route before, and you get to your destination, you get to your office. You know, I'm one of those people, when I'm taking an Uber or a Lyft in the morning, I have my nose buried in my phone and I'm doing email, right? Or even maybe, you know, some folks are, you know, that's the time where they catch up on their social media and whatnot, but you really have your nose buried in your phone or you're not really paying attention. And the driver really plays a really important role in making sure that you are safe when you're exiting, right? And, you know, this can of course differ in suburban or rural areas. And you can imagine this is very different when you get to, you know, urban areas. And there's a lot happening on the outside of the car.
Like an airport, for example.
Exactly. There's lots going on. And that driver plays such a crucial role in making sure that you're exiting at the right time. You know, I've had it so many times where I'm not paying attention and I'm about to open the door and the driver's, wait, you know, there's a cyclist outside, or wait, you know, someone's, you know, walking up. And even at that moment, the driver is also playing an important role in making sure that they're pulling over to the right space, right? They're not going to pull over where there's a big tree or there's a mailbox, so that you're going to swing the door open into hitting something. And so they're really orchestrating this safe exit for you and the outside actors around. And so as you think about that, you know, it's even really common in really dense urban areas, what they call doorings, right? You open the door into a cyclist. That's actually much more common than you think. And so as you imagine, when you remove the driver from the car, how do we solve for that, right? How do you solve for the fact that we have to assume that the rider is not paying attention? We have to assume that the cyclists on the outside of the door or the pedestrians on the outside of the car are also not paying attention to when a door might be opening. Or we have to assume also that the car has taken us and parked and pulled over to a safe spot, that as a rider, I'm not going to swing the door and open into another object or into a person. So how do we orchestrate that? And how do we make sure that we're doing that safely? You know, another rideshare and really more also just driving in general use case. What happens when the car is driving? Think about when you're driving down a very narrow street, and it's not a one way, it's two ways, and there's cars parked on both sides, and you meet another car in the middle, and there's this eye communication that happens. Oh, I'll back up, or no, you back up. And someone, you know, through actual hand motions or eye signals, you're creating this experience of the cars are doing something to let the other one through. But what happens if there's no other driver to make that communication with? What do you do? Or let's say you get to a four-way stop And, I remember when I was learning how to drive, a thing that my mom always said to me is, if I'm a pedestrian, and if I can't see the driver's eyes, I have to assume that the driver does not see me. But what happens if there's no more eyes in the car? What do? How do you play that that game of who goes and who's holding back? Even, with ride sharing, with an Uber or a Lyft today, and it could be that you see your car coming, and maybe they're at a stoplight and you're right there and you want to get in now. I don't want to walk the other 2 blocks. We've kind of met prior. I might try and, wave the driver down or call the driver, and I might just walk up to the car, quickly get in. But if there's no driver, that's not very safe. It's not a very safe interaction. So how do we do that, right? How do we really create an experience where actors on the outside or writers on the inside really understand what exactly they should be doing and the journey, and it's really clear? Those are some really interesting, general self-driving rideshare problem spaces.
This brings me to another question. In this role and the past roles that you've held, you've had to create a customer experience without really being able to prototype a product. You can't take what you've just described or what you did in the chronic health space as examples and put it into someone's hands, have them interact with it, and then improve the result or change the result. You've got to somehow gain the insights, create the product, and then test it. How do you gain insights, and how do you approach that if that's the challenge?
The biggest mistake you can make is find yourself a year into whatever it is that you're producing and you're making, and you have engineers working on this for a year, and you find yourself at a situation where then you're testing. What happens is you find yourself in a sticky situation where you're never going to get it perfect the first time. You won't. I've never seen that happen. It doesn't, there's always little things that you're going to need to change about the experience. It's really important to focus on making sure that you are getting your user from A to B, and it should be so seamless that the user doesn't even realize that you've stitched together this very detailed journey that you're taking them on, that they end up where you want them to. And so it's so important to find ways to get creative, to create prototypes, or to create studies where you can watch your users. I say, don't listen to your users, watch them. And so there's so many tools out there today where you can create design prototypes that require no engineering. And you can stitch them together, whether it's on your computer or whether it's mirrored on your phone, and you can watch them go through some journeys that you've created for them. And sometimes you can also get creative if you do have an engineer, and there's really no way, if you find yourself that there's no way to do it with just a design prototype, find a way to do it where you've created an MVP that is so lean that it only takes you maybe a month to build, right? And that way you can test it really, really early on. Or find yourself in a situation where you have created the architecture in a way that is so flexible and so configurable that you have the mentality of really being experiential, so that you can create lots of different A/B or even ABC tests with how you've kind of can turn the different levers and the logic. Maybe you've created, it should be that it's really off board, so that you can change the different levers without needing a release, and so that you can very quickly create different experiments, and you don't find yourself in a situation where you've been working for a year and everything you've done is hard coded, and you now have to go back and throw a lot of stuff away. So just see see what you can do with design prototypes. If you can't, see what you can do with making a really lean MVP and making as much of the logic configurable. That's what I would say.
That's really helpful. I'm hearing in what you're saying as well that you're creating a customer journey map as well. When you talked about stitching together the steps in the journey, and that looking at the whole beginning to end of that interaction is important. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, it's really important to make sure that you really understand your customer and even diving into the customer to understand within that customer, do you actually have multiple personas? Who is it, or it could be more than one, of these personas are you creating this for? Do they have different journeys? Do they have different moments where you actually might want to take one of the personas in a different path than the other persona? Really understanding your customer is going to allow you to make sure that you've created that experience in that seamless manner that I talked about, where they don't even realize that they have ended up exactly where you want them to end up. And creating customer journeys and maps is a great exercise to do at the very beginning. Understanding you can even create it so much so that you've given, persona A as a name and who they are and where they work, and you can really go into detail, and you can use these different personas as you're going through the product development process and you're creating these experiences. Send these kind of fake personas through that journey. And then it's even helpful at the end when you're testing, find some of the people that fit these personas that you've created and use those people to actually be testing your product. And that can be really helpful.
Nice. That is the approach that we take in this program. So it's helpful to hear it from your perspective. I'm thinking of a simple example as being a kneeling bus. And if you were an individual versus a mother with a child in a stroller versus a user with a bicycle, they could be the same age person, but they could be three very different experiences that have to go very smoothly and safely for each of those passengers.
Exactly. You brought up something really interesting, and which is right, which is the need. So each of these personas is going to have a different need, and that's going to help influence the journey. So you talked about someone who has a stroller and has a baby versus someone who has, they're a cyclist. They're each going to have a different need and something that they're needing to accomplish and that they're wanting to do. And those are really important to identify and run those through the journey or the experiences that you're creating, and make sure that there's no friction that's happening along the way, and that they're able to accomplish their need within your product, within the experience.
That's great. When I think about your career, I always think of you as being a startup person, because each of the environments you've worked in is a very innovative environment. Whether it was MD Revolution or Salesforce or Uber or Waymo, even though many of them are quite large companies. If you were doing a startup yourself or had a team and you were doing a startup, what would your first step be in regards to identifying an unmet need and ensuring that you had the right potential solution?
Yeah, the most important part first is understanding the market, right? Understanding what and the problem that you're trying to solve. So doing market research is really, really important. And understanding the problem that you're wanting to solve within that market, and making sure that it's validated and that it also makes sense from your business model perspective. You don't want to end up, down the road and you've done all of this work to find that what you were creating really only solves a small problem in a small market, and maybe it's not really worth it. That's the first thing. And then once you've validated that, really then doing that customer experience and the journey and that research, and understanding who is it that you're solving this for? Who is this product for? Understanding all of that is so important, because that is going to be used at every step in your product development process. You're always going to come back to your customer. If you don't know the customer well, you should, let's say you're building something for, a sales team. you should be a power user. If maybe I'm not a salesperson, but then I'm going to go sit with some of my users, my customers that are sales folks for weeks or maybe a month. And I'm going to watch them so carefully. What is the first thing that they do when they turn on their computer and they get to work? What tools are they using? How do they go about their day? Where do they like when do they count? When do they see their different hurdles or obstacles in their day? And where are they finding those? Right? You want to document all of that. You want yourself to be a power user, even if it's not if you weren't before. And that's so important to do that up front and at the very beginning, because when you're creating the experiences and the product, you're always going to come back and run all of your customers through that. And so that is something that I always do at the very, very beginning. And that can take a little bit of time, but that data is really powerful to make sure that you're on track the entire time and you stay focused.
Beautiful. This has been so helpful, Orlee. I know that our teams will be able at this stage of the journey to put everything that you've said to immediate use. I really appreciate you taking the time out of what I know is a pretty intense schedule to share your insights with us.